Now we're going to continue here. We're in the chapter of the Friday prayer, Salatul Jumu'ah. And the author says, قال المصنف رحمه الله, said the author, may Allah have mercy upon him. وشرائط فعلها ثلاثة. The conditions for performing Jumu'ah are three. He mentions three, but there are more really. أن تكون البلد مصرا أو قرية. For the town to be, or for the land to be, the balad, for the balad to be a city or a village. So the word balad could mean land. It doesn't have to be a city per se. Or balad could be a city or a town. أن تكون البلد مصر, for the balad to be a misr, to be a town, a city. A township. A township. For the land to be a township. I like that better. Or a village. What's meant by township is that it has a governor, meaning like a mayor, and it has a judge, and it has a market. So it's a township, let's say, for the land to be a township, or a qarya, a village. And qarya can mean city also. وأن يكون العدد 40, and that the number of participants would be 40 من أهل الجمعة, 40 of the people of Friday prayer, the people of the Friday prayer. The people who make Friday prayer obligatory in the first place. Who are the people who make Friday prayer obligatory in the first place? The citizens. Remember, the citizens, they have to establish the Jumu'ah. The citizens of a town, those are the people who live in a town and they don't leave that town, neither in the summer nor in the winter, except for some task, and then they come back. So those are the people who have to establish the Jumu'ah in the first place. If they do, then the residents in the town have to go to Jumu'ah. The residents are the people who stay in the town for 4 days or more, but with the intention to leave eventually. So the people of the Jumu'ah here says, the people of the Friday prayer, that's the citizens of the town. And the residents follow them. The residents cannot establish the Jumu'ah prayer. The citizens have to. And the travelers don't have to go to Jumu'ah, even if the citizens of the town do establish the Jumu'ah. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ الْعَدَدُ 40 مِنْ أَهْلِ الْجُمُعَةِ, and that the number would be 40 of the Jumu'ah people. وَأَنْ يَكُونَ الْوَقْتُ بَاقِيًا, and that the time would be remaining. فَإِنْ خَرَجَ الْوَقْتُ أَوْ عُدِمَتِ الشُّرُوطُ سُلِّيَتْ ظُهْرًا. And so, if the time goes out, Asr comes in, or if any of the other conditions are lacking, then Friday prayer, then the prayer that would be performed would be the noon prayer. الشرح, the explanation. لصحة الجمعة شروط مع شروط الصلاة. For the validity of the Friday prayer, there are conditions above the normal conditions for general prayer. What are those additional conditions for Friday prayer? Minha darul iqamah. One of them is a township. وهي عبارة عن الأبنية التي يستوطنها العدد الذين يصلون الجمعة. This township is a reference to or an expression of the buildings where the number of those who pray Friday prayer reside. Reside here means they take as a nation. And nation here means a city. Yani, because the word watan or al-watan, this word watan, it might mean nation or country. Here, when we say huwa mustawtin, means he's a citizen. So this township that we're talking about, which is a condition for Jumu'ah, this refers to the buildings where the number of Jumu'ah participants reside. سواء في ذلك المدن والقرى, whether those were cities or villages. وسواء فيها البناء من حجر أو طين أو خشب أو نحوه, and whether those buildings were made of stone or clay or wood or the like. Yani, could even be made of cane or twigs. Those buildings, where that village where people live there. So what's meant here is that these structures, even if they're made out of cane or twigs, these structures, this is their town or their village. ووجه اشتراط ذلك أنه لم ينقل إقامتها في عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والخلفاء الراشدين إلا كذلك. And the point of evidence, or the evidence for that, what's the proof that that's a condition that has to be in a town? Because it was not transmitted that Friday prayer was established during the time of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nor during the time of any of the guided caliphs, except like that. The only thing transmitted about the Prophet performing Jumu'ah was that he did so in a town or township, or the likes of a township, like a village, as opposed to a campsite. وَلَا جُمُعَةَ عَلَى أَهْلِ الْخِيَامِ. There is no Friday prayer obligatory on people who live in tents, like a campsite. وَإِنْ لَازَمُوا مَكَانًا وَاحِدًا صَيْفًا وَشِتَاءً. Even if these people who live in tents stay there, summer and winter, and they don't relocate, they're not nomads, but they live in tents. If their case is that they live in tents, then Jumu'ah is not obligatory on them. because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not make Jumu'ah obligatory on the people who lived in tents on the outskirts of Medina or around Medina. وَمِنْهَا أَن تُقَامَ فِي جَمَاعَةٍ. And another condition for the Friday prayer, one that the author didn't mention explicitly, is that the Friday prayer would be performed in congregation. لأنه عليه الصلاة والسلام والخلفاء الراشدين فمن بعدهم, because the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام and the guided caliphs and those who came after them, لم ينقل عنهم ولا عن غيرهم فعلها فرادا. It was not reported from them, nor from anyone else for that matter, the performance of Jumu'ah by an individual or by individuals. It's not transmitted from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam any performance of a Friday prayer by an individual, or that the Prophet validated that alayhi salatu wasalam. So then take that proof there, and then let the other cases that have the same proof be understandable to you. Meaning what? We just said for something else that the proof for it is that it wasn't transmitted from the Prophet otherwise. That was the proof for it. So someone might say, that's a proof. Like someone might say, what's the proof you don't have to pray Jumu'ah if you're not in a township or the like? So the answer is, because it wasn't transmitted from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Otherwise, other than that was not transmitted from him. So someone might say, that's a proof. You know what I mean? We were still able to do it though. So what's like that then, if that's not so easy to understand for someone? What's like that is the case of praying Friday prayer as individuals. You'd say to the person, can you pray Friday prayer as individuals? He'd say, no. That's unheard of. So, do you know what's the proof that you can't do that? The actual proof? The proof for that is that it wasn't transmitted from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So the only thing that was transmitted about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam for praying the Friday prayer was that he did it in congregation. And there's no transmission about anyone praying Friday prayer as individuals. So one could say, yeah, though that's clear, that's understandable, sure. We never saw something like that. So yeah. So same thing. You don't pray Friday prayer not in a town because for the same reason. Wasn't transmitted from the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam that he did that. Yani that he did otherwise. ثم شرط الجماعة أن تكون 40. Now, the author, he did implicitly, though, mention the Jama'ah prayer. He didn't explicitly say that. Because he said, وَأَنْ يَكُونَ الْعَدَدُ 40, that the number would be 40. 40 what? 40 people praying, each one on his own? No. So then there's a hint here for congregational prayer. So really praying in congregation, it is a condition. The author's words have that embedded. That meaning is embedded in the author's paragraph here. The people of Friday prayer would be 40 in number. Although he's going to say it explicitly later, though. He's going to say it has to be done in congregation. ثم شرط الجماعة أن تكون 40. And furthermore, the condition for this particular congregational prayer, which is the Friday prayer, is that the number of participants be at least 40. واحتج له بأنه عليه الصلاة والسلام جمع بالمدينة ولم ينقل أنه جمع بأقل من 40. And its evidence is the same as those other two we just said. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prayed Friday prayer in Medina, and it was never documented about him that he did so with less than 40. So imagine a person, he didn't learn. All he knows is Friday prayer is obligatory. And then he found himself in some situation, like he's on the college campus. That's its own campus, not inside the city. It's its own city. That's another example of a city, by the way. A college campus, a university campus that has its own land. That's a city in itself, religiously. But no one who's there is what? Is a citizen. All of them are residents or travelers, because nobody's staying there. Even if they had professors who lived on campus, that's not their permanent house, though. It's just a perk. So imagine a person who hasn't learned, and all he knows is that Friday prayer is obligatory, and he finds himself in some situation, like he's on a college campus, or he's at a campsite, and no one in the town is a citizen. And so he rallies the Muslims to pray Friday prayer, Friday prayer, Friday prayer. And then someone who learned comes into the community. He says, wait, you can't do Friday prayer here on this college campus here. You say, what? That's crazy. You got to pray Friday prayer, bro. You can't skip Friday prayer. So then you'd have to tell him, and yeah, but there's conditions for Friday prayer. You can't do it this way. And then he said, what's your proof? So if you told him, it was not transmitted from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam otherwise, then if he doesn't have knowledge in the first place, that's not going to be a convincing proof for him. So anyway, the author says, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ شَرْطَ الْأَرْبَعِينَ واعلم أن شرط الأربعين الذكورة والتكليف والحرية والإقامة على سبيل التوطن. And know what we already said in the previous lesson, that the condition of each one of those 40 citizens is that they be male and accountable and free, not slaves, and that they would be citizens. What's another case where some people wouldn't be citizens? They'd be residents or travelers. A prison. That's going to be its own town and surrounded by wall even, or a gate. So what you have there mostly is residents, because people that's not staying there. They don't intend to stay there either. Either because they're waiting for their time to finish and then they're going to leave, or because they might even get transferred. So either way, they're not intending to stay there. So if you don't have 40 citizens to do the Jumu'ah, it's not going to be valid. This case is important for the incarcerated Muslims to know about because you don't want to do invalid worship. So the condition for each one of those 40 is that they be male, accountable, free, and citizens. بحيث لا يضعنون شتاء ولا صيفا إلا لحاجة. That means that they don't move from the town, neither in the winter nor in the summer, but for some errand, for some task, and then they come back. So are they sinful for not doing it? You mean 40 citizens in their own town? Males? 40 male, pubescent, free citizens of a town. If they don't do it, are they sinful for not doing it? The prisoner's word doesn't meet the conditions. So they can't be sinful if they don't fulfill the conditions. If you don't have water, you're not going to be sinful for not making wudu. Then you're going to make tayammum. If you don't have water or soil, you're not going to be sinful for praying without any purification. Or if you don't have a foot, you're not going to be sinful for not washing 2 feet. فلا تنعقد بالإناث ولا بالصبيان ولا بالعبيد ولا بالمسافرين. And so Friday prayer is not initiated. Yani, it won't even start. Even if they wanted to do it, it won't start if that's done by females, meaning only. It's only women. So they established the Jumu'ah. Let's say 40 women who are citizens of a town. This is not valid. Or children, or slaves, not valid for them to establish the Jumu'ah. Or travelers. And add to that the residents. He's going to say right here, وَالْغَرِيبُ إِذَا أَقَامَ بِبَلَدٍ وَاتَّخَذَهُ وَطَنًا صَارَ لَهُ حُكْمُ أَهْلِهِ فِي وُجُوبِ الْجُمُعَةِ. And the stranger, if he settled in a town and he took it as a nation, nation means that's his home city now, then the judgment of the people of that town apply to him. It will begin to apply to him. Yani, it means if you relocate and you move to a town where Jumu'ah is held, yani, if you're a man, pubescent man, free. If you relocate to live in a town where the Jumu'ah is established, then by relocating, that means that's your new town you're going to live in now. And you're not going to leave there in the summer nor in the winter except for some task. And then you'd come back. Then now you have the judgment of those people in that town concerning the obligation of Jumu'ah. وَإِن لَمْ يَتَّخِذْهُ بَالْعَزْمِ وَإِن لَمْ يَتَّخِذْهُ. But if this person who's in a town doesn't take that town as his nation, so it's clear for you now, when I say nation here, it means the city only, in this case. بَلْ عَزْمُهُ الرُّجُوعُ إِلَى بَلَدِهِ بَعْدَ مُدَّةٍ. Rather, his decision is that he shall eventually go back to his own town after some time. Even if it's a long time, like even if it's 10 years or 20 years. But he just doesn't have the intention to stay where he is. يخرج بها عن كونه مسافرا قصيرة. يخرج بها عن كونه مسافرا. Then by staying in this place for more than 3 days, even though he wants to leave eventually, then he stops being a traveler since he wants to stay there for 4 days or more. قصيرة كانت أو طويلة, whether that's a long trip or a short trip, now he's in a new town and he's not going to stay there for good, but for more than 4 days. Then as soon as he gets to that town, he stops being a traveler and he becomes a resident. كالتاجر والمتفقه, like a trader or a student of knowledge. Like that was our case. We traveled overseas, went to a town where Jumu'ah is conducted, staying in that town, let's say, for months at a time. If you don't go home for summer break, then years at a time. If you go home for summer break for months at a time, then you're just a resident only, not a citizen. But you have to go to Jumu'ah. والذي يرحل من بلده من قلة الماء أو خوف الظلمة قاتلهم الله ثم عزمه أن يعود إذا انفرج أمره فهؤلاء لا تلزمهم الجمعة ولا تنعقد بهم على الأصح. And had someone sought asylum or if someone left his own town because there's no water there, or he fled from the unjust people, he fled from his own tyrant government, or he fled from the drug cartels and the gangsters or the likes, may Allah punish the unjust ones and spare us from being amongst them. And his decision, though, is that if his matter becomes easy, he'll go back home. Then anyone like that is not obligated to go to Jumu'ah if the citizens of the town don't establish the Jumu'ah. وَلَا تَنْعَقِدُ بِهِمْ. And people like that, they can't be the ones who initiate the Jumu'ah. عَلَى الْأَصَحِ, according to what's most accurate. ومنها أي من شروط صحة الجمعة. And amongst the conditions for the validity of Friday prayer and تقع في الوقت is that it's done on time. ووقتها وقت الظهر, and its time is ظهر time. فلا تقضى على صورتها بالاتفاق. And therefore, since it has a very specific time, which is ظهر time, nothing more, then even if a person missed it, he's not going to make it up as Jumu'ah, 2 rak'ahs, by agreement. There's no way for this prayer to be made up as a Jumu'ah. If its time is missed, then it can't be prayed as Jumu'ah. It's going to have to be prayed as Dhuhr. حجتنا ما رواه البخاري عن أنس رضي الله عنهما. Our evidence is what Al-Bukhari narrated from Anas, may Allah accept from both of them, أنه قال, that he said, كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يصلي الجمعة حين تزول الشمس. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to pray Friday prayer when the sun would come out of its zenith. So that's Dhuhr time. وروى مسلم عن سلمة بن الأكوع رضي الله عنه. And Muslim narrated from Salama ibn al-Aqwa, may Allah accept from him, أنه قال, that he said, كنا نصلي مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الجمعة. We used to pray with the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم the Friday prayer. إذا زالت الشمس, when the sun comes out of its zenith. So that's Dhuhr time. ثم نرجع فنتتبع الفيء أي ظل الحيطان. Then we would go back and we would gauge the shadow, meaning the shadow of the walls. فلو ضاق الوقت عن الجمعة صلوا ظهرا. And if the time were too tight to pray Friday prayer, they prayed Dhuhr. Well, so hold on. Then we would gauge the shadow, and he means the shadow of the walls, the shadows of the walls. So that's the end of his quote there. So, وَلَوْ ضَاقَ الْوَقْتُ عَنِ الْجُمُعَةِ صَلَّوْا ظُهْرًا. If the time is too tight to pray Friday prayer, that's along with its speeches, by the way. You can't do the prayer without the speeches. Then it will only be prayed as Dhuhr. وَلَا يَجُوزُ الشُّرُوعُ فِي الْجُمُعَةِ. And if the time is too tight for the speeches and the prayer, it's not, but still Dhuhr time though. It's Dhuhr time still, but it's not enough time for the speeches and the prayer. Then it's not permissible to start the Jumu'ah, because you're not going to be able to fit it all in time. نص عليه الشافعي في الأم. Imam al-Shafi'i documented that case in his book Al-Umm. وَلَوْ خَرَجَ الْوَقْتُ وَهُمْ فِيهَا أَتَمُّوهَا ظُهْرًا. And if the time goes out altogether, then if the time goes out altogether while the people are actually praying Jumu'ah, they're in the process of praying Jumu'ah, and before they say the salam to finish their prayer, the Dhuhr time goes out. أَتَمُّوهَا ظُهْرًا. Then they will pray 4 rak'ahs and pray it as Dhuhr. وَإِن صَلُّوا رَكَعَةً فِي الْوَقْتِ. Even if they manage to fit 1 rak'ah in the time. Meaning, what we're saying here is when they said Allahu Akbar to start praying, they made the intention to pray Friday prayer. That's 2 rak'ahs, Friday prayer. But the time went out while they were still praying. So what do? Then they pray 4 rak'ahs of Dhuhr, although they intended to pray Jumu'ah. That's valid. That's the case when it's valid to pray what you didn't intend. You intended to pray Jumu'ah and you wound up praying Dhuhr, and you wound up praying Dhuhr. Wallahu a'lam, and Allah knows best. We'll stop there. Any question?
Sheikh,
Yes.
can you just give the definitions again, the difference between citizen and resident?
Yes. The citizen is a person who stays in a town summer and winter. He doesn't leave the town, in other words. The citizen is the one who does not leave the town. Not in the summer nor in the winter, but for a task, for something he wants to do, some travel he wants to take, some trip or whatever. Then he'd leave the town because there's something he wants to do. And on top of that, he wants to come back. If he does leave the town, he wants to come back. So that's citizen. Mustawtin. And in our literature, it's usually going to say inhabitant. If a person stays in a town for 4 days or more with the intention to eventually leave, then that person is muqim, a resident, not a citizen. And if a person stays in a town for 3 days or less, then that person is musafir, traveler. Is that clear?
Yes.
Ameen wa fiq.